Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Citrix session, episode 161. I'm your host today, Bill Sutton, along with Geremy Meyers from Citrix. Geremy, you want to say hello to everyone?
Bill, how does this work? It's been so long that I've forgotten how the podcast
It
works.
has
So,
been a while, and so I should let everyone in on a little secret there that we historically do these podcasts from noon to 1 on Mondays, and Geremy had a schedule conflict once the reorg happened at Citrix, and so we finally moved it from 12 to 1 to 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern so that Geremy could attend. So glad to have you back, man.
Bill, when you put it that way, I sound very high maintenance, just so you know.
No, you're not high maintenance, brother. No, brother, you're needed and wanted on this thing. So we didn't want to exclude you. So Andy and I said we'll change the time. And it actually, to be honest with you, works out better because I get to have lunch at my normal time, and I'm a very much a creature of habit. So
Now that you say that, I think about that all the time, especially when we kick off and then the stomach starts grumbling and I'm going, man, we always do this right at lunchtime.
yeah, I know. Exactly. So Andy is off busy today after having been out a couple of weeks. So it's just Jeremy and I, which is good. We've got a great topic for this morning, or this afternoon rather. We're going to talk about. Let me share my screen for those of you who are looking, or it is shared. Is it shared, Jeremy?
It's
Yeah.
shared. Yeah, I got you. I can see you.
So we're going to talk about Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops 2402 long-term service release. So this is top of mind. This is, even though it's 2402, which the typical Citrix numbering scheme is the year and the month of release, but this actually didn't make it, I don't think, until what, late March, early April,
I
Jeremy?
want to say, I think it was April. I think this released. When was this blog posted? It was April
April
15th.
15th.
So I gotta think it was about that time actually.
Yeah.
Probably mid-April. Yep.
Yeah. So it was delayed a little bit, but definitely um, ready. We're ready for this for a number of reasons. For those of you who don't know, LTSR, which we use that abbreviation a lot, stands for long-term service release. Jeremy, you want to kind of give the audience a real quick refresher on what that means in Citrix lingo?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we've got most customers that I talk to, not all. I would love to get your opinion on this, Bill, but most customers, they want to standardize on a version of Citrix code that has been vetted out, that has been kind of out and about in various flavors, various versions, and have sort of been, I would say bug free. Not anything is ever completely bug free, but they want to standardize on a version. And they would just kind of want to hang out there for a while. So we created the long-term service release for customers who wanted to standardize on a platform, standardize on a version, and use that version for, up to 5 years. So the way this works is when we release an LTSR, you get 5 years of mainstream support. So that's 5 years. So we just released 2402. Technically, it came out in April, so not the '02 part. So the idea would be you would have support for this particular version for 5 years. So that would be, was it 2029, April 2029, which, who knows what we're going to be doing in 5 years, but we have lots of customers who over the years have standardized on an LTSR version. We'll get to the fact that we've got customers that have standardized on 1912 a few years ago. And so there's an important date to be mindful of there. But this is a version of a release that comes out every 2 to 3 years. So we don't do an LTSR every year, but it becomes very important because there are a lot of features that get introduced in what we call our current releases. Every 3 months. I think we have a current release or a CR release, as we call it. Every 3 months.
Yes.
And listen, we have lots of customers who like to be on the current release because they need the new features. There's a really good example. There's a new version of Teams that was just released. And so we're likely to see the bits in the CVAD code, sooner than we would see those in an LTSR release. So if you need to support the latest versions of Teams, things like that, or there's some other feature that you need, you'd want to be on a CR. Now, having said all that, we roll all this stuff up. So there's a lot of goodness. In fact, I tend to forget what we've released over the past 2 or 3 years until we go to the LTSR, and then we talk about what we've included in the LTSR, and I go, oh my gosh, that's right, we did introduce, provisioning in a cloud or this new codec, that sort of thing. So, it's pretty exciting. Most folks, like I said, want to standardize on a stable release, which is kind of the idea. So there's two trains of thought. So my question to you, Bill, Which, by the way, you've got a different role now, so I don't know how much you'll see this going forward, but in sort of the consulting practice, what do you see customers typically doing? Are they doing CR releases? Are they doing LTSRs?
The vast majority are LTSR.
Yeah.
And I will see it going forward, but it just won't be as I'll still see it going forward because the consultants actually are on my team still. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I'll definitely see it. But to your point, or to your question rather, the majority of the time that we do an upgrade, it is to an LTSR. We have a few customers, and they tend to be the smaller ones that are willing to do a CR. And the important thing for the listeners to understand is the LTSR is the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop version. So it's the on-prem version. The version in the cloud is always CR in a sense, other than what you run on your VDAs or your actual workload servers, wherever they may reside, as well as the Citrix Workspace app, which runs on the endpoint. The cloud version, the controllers and storefront or the workspace, et cetera, the gateway, all of those things are kept current. What is it? Every few weeks, I think, or every month, Jeremy, they're constantly issuing updates to that. And we do have a lot of customers that go with LTSR VDAs. So those are the versions that run on premises, on the actual workloads where the users end up connecting and running their applications or desktops. So we do have customers that leverage the cloud and then have LTSR on-prem for those workloads. And sometimes we'll have storefront and NetScaler, but the full feature of LTSR is really talking more about where those customers are doing it all on-prem or in their data center running controllers and storefront servers and PVS, et cetera.
So you actually bring up a really good point. So we'll touch on this real quick. What is the scope of LTSR? So, you just mentioned the VDA. So that's the software that goes inside of the virtual desktop or the server that's hosting the virtual app, right? So there is an LTS version for that. There's an LTS version for the DDCs, the desktop delivery controllers, the brokers, if you will. So this is the piece that this is where the configuration goes, that sort of thing. What else is a part of that LTSR? I'm just thinking out loud. We've got
Workspace app.
That's good. So that's the piece that sits on the endpoint. We've got storefront.
Yep.
We've got
potentially WIM, right?
WIM. I think WIM
WIM have its own development cycle.
I think it's got its own development cycle. Yeah, it falls outside of that. Yeah. But listen, inside of the LTSR documentation, we won't navigate out to it. I'll actually tell you what's included and what's in scope for the LTSR. So why that's important is that just has to do with support is really what it is. Yeah. So what pieces are supported as a part of that LTSR? We talked about that 5-year train. So anyways, the minutia, but it's important.
For sure. And LTSR 2402, which is what we're going to talk about today, is it says here in the blog itself, it's a successor to 2203. Which of course is about roughly 2 years old, right? Yeah, if I do my math right. But the other thing is to consider is we have a lot of customers that are still on 1912, maybe even a few that are on 715. But 1912, which it's important to know, reaches end of life at the end of the year. So I will say that when 2203 came out back in March of 2022, during that year, we saw a good number of customers that migrated from 715, which at the time was the one about to go end of life, to 2203. So I expect to see something similar this year, for the rest of this year, more customers that are seeking to go to 2402. And I know for a fact that we've already had at least 2 projects that have been signed that are for that purpose specifically. So you want to talk a little bit, Jeremy, about end of life and what that means from a Citrix perspective?
Yeah, so 1912 means, that's a version that we're no longer going to support. So you should be planning, like Bill said, he's got some projects in the works that are migrating up to 1912. So it's a version you should be thinking about migrating off to. Here's the important thing to think about as well, is usually when we talk about upgrading versions of Citrix, we're also thinking about upgrading versions of Windows, right? So we're thinking about the different versions of Windows that went end of life or are going end of life as well. So for instance, in 1912, man, we had a heck of a lot of customers running Windows Server 2016, right? So,
Yes, we did.
this is not just a Citrix upgrade cycle, it's a Windows upgrade cycle. So, I think, we talked about this. We did a webinar, Bill and I did a webinar recently where we talked about versions of Windows and its compatibility with,
Mhm.
this version of the LTSR, which is important. So, you need to think about the components that are the LTSR brokering pieces, right? Like your DDCs need to be on a certain version, storefront, PBS, these sorts of things need to be on a certain version. But, the VDAs, and this is where it gets a little tricky, is you'll want to be on a VDA version that's LTSR, but you also have to think about the applications that are running on those desktops and
Right.
those, on those servers. Are they compatible? So there's an upgrade thought process that you've got to consider as well. Now, what you'll notice is what you'll find, in fact, we've got a matrix on the documentation that talks about what versions of code are supported with the LTSR and what versions of code that'll work with the LTSR. So for instance, listen, I know we've got apps out there that run on 2016 that cannot be upgraded to 2019 or 2022, Windows 2019, 2022, which
Mhm.
it is what it is. I mean, that's a support concern from a third-party application vendor perspective. These VDAs, like the 20 or the 1912 VDA, it will work, it will connect, it'll broker with the newer LTSR, but just be aware you're probably gonna face some supportability with it. But again, that's probably not so much, certainly from a Citrix perspective for sure, but you've also got, probably some concerns around just even 2016 support. So again, this should be a part of that matrix that you're thinking through as you're upgrading, is not only am I upgrading my infrastructure, it needs to be on a newer version of Windows, but what about the apps as well? So that's equally as important.
Yeah, all of it plays into it, and we like Jeremy said when we did that webinar, we showed the end of life dates for 2016 and 2019. 2019 was actually earlier this year, so really 2022 and whatever's next. I'm not even sure what's next. Maybe it's 2025. Those OSs are, at least 2022 is where you want to go, particularly for the infrastructure components like storefront and the DDC. But it doesn't mean you can't run the VDAs, the operating systems to which the users connect on an older version of the VDA. Just recognize that if there's an issue, it may not be supported.
Yep.
So they talk a little bit about CR customers, whether it's relevant to them, and it talks about the latest current releases. Some customers like to continue with the current release as they're delivered. Like Jeremy was saying earlier, when the 2402 was 2402 LTSR was released, they had a slide out there about all the new features and functionality. And as I looked at it, I said, well, we've already had this, so we've already had that. And you have to remember that the last LTSR was 2 years ago, right? So a lot of things have come out in the past 2 years that have been rolled into the CR that are now making their way into the LTSR. So it's something to recognize. Even if you've heard about a lot of these things, you may not have had them if you were on the LTSR platform. Now is your opportunity to get them. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about upgrading to LTSR. There's a lot of ways to do it. We talked about this on our webinar too, I think. Obviously, one way is to do an in-place upgrade, which generally we don't recommend. But the other way, the most common way, is to do a migration parallel, where you can upgrade all the components separate from the running environment and have the ability to quickly and easily transition over to the new environment once it's fully deployed and tested.
Well, oddly enough, maybe not oddly enough, I think an OS upgrade, a Windows upgrade, will probably force your hand on this anyway. So if you're running 1912 on like Windows 2016, then you're going to have to stand up separate OSs anyway. So,
right.
Which makes sense. But to your point, I think one of the things that is outlined in the documentation is if you're going through this upgrade, it's a very good flow chart that walks you through, what needs to happen and what order. I mean, ultimately, the big thing is you'll have to upgrade your database schema. So that's a big deal. So I can't, I'll point out two different things. Number one, I can't emphasize enough, back up the database. Snapshot of the database server is not the same thing as backing up the database. So thing number one.
That's right. We've all been bit by that one for sure.
Back the database up. And then number two, listen, I am not on here necessarily pitching the cloud, but that's one thing you don't have to necessarily worry about if you're using the DAS service. So the brokers are hosted by Citrix, the SQL Server or whatever is hosting the configuration is hosted by Citrix. So those are steps you wouldn't have to include. But again, we have a lot of customers running on-prem. LTSR is where they want to be at. There's my pitch for backing up the database and potentially, maybe migrating to the service.
Exactly. All right. So let's talk about what's new. So I mentioned a minute ago that a lot of the things we've seen in CRs over the past 2 years have made their way to the LTSR, but let's go one level deeper than that and talk a little bit about what has changed. And one of the biggest things here in the middle of the screen is top end user experience improvements. So there's been a lot of enhancements to HDX. Andy and I did a podcast on this, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, where we talked about what was in the HDX for 2402 blog. But since Geremy has made his way back to our podcast, let's why don't you double click on this, Geremy, and talk a little bit about what you know about the enhancements.
Man, I wish I was a graphics nerd, but I will tell you that this is one of the most requested features in any LTSR. Is what gets missed is the user experience. Like that is the big gap between the old LTSR and this LTSR. By the way, nothing wrong with 2203, nothing wrong with 1912. No. It's just you do miss. This is the HDX protocol is the piece that is sort of the secret sauce that folks forget about. And, we're constantly evolving this piece of it. We're updating not only the codec itself, but when you think about it, we've got these variable networks, we have different requirements from just an image quality perspective. We have technologies that have evolved over time as well. So, for instance, in the past, it's been H.264, H.265. Now we're supporting the AV1 codec. This has been in current releases for a little while, but, now it's included in the LTSR. And, listen, I do a lot of my computing. I'm not going to say on the road. I haven't traveled as much, but I do it from, networks that are, some potentially spotty Wi-Fi, just coverage wise. And so, any time that you can deliver high quality graphics over congested networks, over high loss networks and still provide a great experience is a pretty big deal. So we've included that into this release as well. The biggest being the AV1 codec.
Yeah, the AV1 codec is huge, and it also talks in the blog a little bit about EDT and including congestion control and loss tolerant mode. EDT, I believe, is inherently a UDP protocol.
It is. Yep.
Which it doesn't have all of the overhead of TCP, but also doesn't have the ability to acknowledge or request retransmission. But by putting congestion control and loss tolerant, we solve for some of that and still have a really solid high definition experience for end users. And let's face it, us technologists can build a solid environment, but if the end user doesn't like it or the performance of that environment is not up to what it needs to be from a graphics perspective, it's probably not going to be used very often. So this is critical to that, and Citrix continues to innovate in this space and has done a lot of that over the past few years that is making its way into the LTSR.
Well, the other thing too, Bill, is, I think audio quality is a big deal. We've got, call centers have always been a big use case with Citrix, but on the flip side, especially after COVID, a lot of these call centers have gone remote. Yeah, sometimes remote office, but in a lot of cases remote, in the sense that you got folks working from home. So how do you provide quality audio, especially, to your point, like I don't need TCP for audio. Listen, if I missed what you said because the packets drop, it doesn't help me for you to resend that, right? So the fact that piece is UDP and the fact that we can sort of plan for congestion makes a whole lot of sense and really makes some of those, call center audio teams, those sorts of use case, just perform better for sure.
Yeah, I was actually in a location a couple weeks ago where you're going to laugh, but where the bandwidth was, I want to say it was 112 kilobits per second. So basically, it was my father's room in where he lives, and it's a shared Wi-Fi type scenario. And I actually was doing work via EDT without any problems, but he couldn't stream Netflix at all. So
that's a really compelling story, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing that it worked, and I'm like, this is back. I'm waiting for the squealing sounds in the background of the 56K modem here, but
oh my gosh,
yeah. So All right, so the next item here, top workload and device flexibility improvements. So there's been a lot of advancements here about flexibility for administrators to choose how things are delivered. Some of the enhancements are related to provisioning, like PVS in Azure and Google Cloud, leveraging the VDA with Citrix DAS for Windows 10 and 11 multi-session, et cetera. You want to talk a little bit about this, Jeremy?
You know what? This is one of those. This is one of those buckets where this has been possible in with DAS for a while. This has been possible
Yes.
with current release for a while, but now we're seeing it added to the LTSR. So the idea here is, believe it or not, Bill, you can run PVS, a provisioning server, in Azure. You can run it in Google Cloud, and now that is officially supported by 2402. So again, it's always been, I won't say always, but it's been a part of DAS for a while. But if you have a use case, and I think the use case here for customers are the ones that want to either create a zone or a resource location in a cloud. So let's just say you've got 2402 sitting in your data center. You've got most of your resource sitting in this data center. However, you need to spin up maybe a footprint in Azure. Maybe that needs to be, for DR, what have you.
Right.
Of course, you can do that, assuming you have the right license. So this needs to be either the newer hybrid multi-cloud license. It needs to be either the platform license. And it could be the on-prem term. No, I'll back away from that. So it's got to be your hybrid multi-cloud. But the idea is you can either run that on-prem environment in a data center and connect out to the cloud, or, we've got customers who will run the entire Citrix stack in the cloud as well. So
Yes.
DDCs and storefronts and all those pieces. That's probably more commonly the use case.
Yeah.
But regardless, now you can use PBS with Azure and GCP. I always forget because we've been integrating AVD with Citrix DAS for a while, but now we support that with the LTSR. So out of Azure, if you've got the Enterprise Windows Virtual Desktop, or AVD as they call it, this integrates with the LTSR, which is pretty nice. Not just that, Windows 10 and Windows 11, so that's a big deal. A lot of customers
and multi-session,
finally
not as
multi-session.
well as session, but multi-session as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So, AVD can run Windows 10, Windows 11 in single session mode, but listen, I think a lot of the value there is running it multi-session as well, and completely supported. And then lastly, and this just came up late last week for a customer, is being able to run VMware Cloud on Azure and integrating that in. So if you're running any of the VMware Cloud solutions, and I think the one on Azure, the one on Google Cloud, and the one on AWS, they work just a smidge differently.
Yeah.
Regardless, you can do that with the latest LTSR.
And then Linux. So Linux has been supported for a long time, and it's more robust than ever in the 2402 LTSR. Citrix has added a lot of features to this around EDT and Azure AD integration. They've also added, and this I don't know, Jeremy, that I followed this that well. We don't see a lot of demand for it. We see some, but I wasn't aware of all the versions of Linux that are supported now. It used to be just a couple of versions, and that's expanded considerably, hasn't it?
Yeah. So, for the longest time, we've supported Red Hat. We also support Ubuntu. For a while there, we supported CentOS, and we still do. But that project has actually, I forget what they call it in the Linux world, but CentOS has actually been sort of retired as a version, and it's actually, I think, what's it called now? Rocky Linux, I want to say. Same idea, same code base as Red Hat. So for customers who don't have don't want to pay for Red Hat, that sort of thing.
Right.
CentOS was nice because it was based on the same code base. Now it's Rocky Linux. I think there are a few other versions that are all based on that.
Yeah.
That enterprise Red Hat version, but that's supported. SUSE Linux, I think, is still supported as well. But here's what's interesting about Linux. For the longest time, that's always been sort of an oil and gas industry specific sort of use case, but I'm seeing it more and more as organizations are starting to really adopt sort of the DevOps mindset as they're sort of retooling and refactoring applications. They're doing that using Kubernetes, and Linux has become the platform. I also see this on Mac as well. So you've got developers doing this on Mac, but anything that's native Kubernetes. I mean, that's what the development teams are starting to use for their development. So here again, how do you manage your IP in these development environments? Heck, Linux with the VDA. There you go.
Absolutely. Yep. Very interesting how that's moving forward. And I think you're right. I think Kubernetes and Docker and containers generally
Yep.
are driving a lot of that demand for the Linux platform. Next section of the year is the top operational and IT efficiency improvements. So a couple things here to point out are the Web Studio for on-premises, which actually I'm in the process of spinning that up now to see what that looks like. I haven't done it before, but the idea is to bring as much feature parity and UI parity, if you will, user interface parity between what's in the cloud and what's on premises. So a user that is running it on premises and then moves to the cloud, the change or the upskilling that may have historically been needed isn't really needed anymore. The other item here is auto scale for on premises. So, Geremy, you want to touch on these or one of them?
Yeah. I mean,
Web
Studio is fantastic, by the way.
Yeah.
So it has been I still remember working with product management when we made this flip from the MMC based studio to the Web Studio in the cloud.
Right.
And the fact that we've got Web Studio back on prem, to your point, feature parity is really important. But I mean, at the end of the day, geez Louise, the MMC is how old, Bill? 25 years?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. It's been a while. Yeah.
It's been that released with Windows 2000, and I can remember thinking this is the best ever. Like, you forget how we used to do things on NT4 servers, right? That was like, let's go get VNC and let's just remote into something. But there wasn't the tooling wasn't the same. And so when they introduced the MMC, that was great, but it was pretty long in the tooth. So I'm happy to see Web Studio and its snappiness, with the on-prem version, the LTSR version. So that's pretty exciting.
Right. Yeah, and then auto scale. Auto scale is used a lot in the cloud, obviously, to help orchestrate and spin up and spin down machines at the appropriate times to help minimize cost. And now we've got auto scale for on premises. So I think we did a webinar or a podcast rather that covered some of this several months ago. Geremy, probably one of the current releases, I would imagine. But they can do schedule-based scaling to help customers get the most out of their data center investments and help reduce power costs, cooling costs, things like that particularly during off hours or on the weekends or whenever it's appropriate. There's lots of other use cases for this where it makes sense to leverage auto scale to be able to dynamically spin down and spin up workloads as needed and minimize the impact on the end user.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some pretty entertaining discussions about this, because my thought was always, I mean, listen, are you saving, first of all, your hardware on-prem is a sunk cost, right?
Yeah.
Typically, I haven't bought hardware in a while. I got to imagine there's probably some way to do subscription pricing on hardware. But I'll digress here and just say, for a lot of cases, that's been a sunk cost.
Yeah.
So, it didn't really make sense to me. However, there is folks do want to be great and they want to manage their power. They want to manage those resources, which it adds up. And then secondly, auto scaling, especially if you have this deployed in a cloud, makes sense as well. So we talk about.
I had the same thought. I'm like, why would you worry about this? And if I go back to the beginning of my IT career, I think about most data centers. I can remember working for a bank in South Carolina, and their data center was literally in their ops center. It was just a raised floor room. So for them, what perhaps wasn't as big a deal, but because they had all the power already provisioned and everything. But you go to a co-location facility and you're paying based on the use of the amount of kilowatts or what have you, kilowatt hours that you're consuming. So if you can spin workloads down off hours to the point where they're not using as many kilowatts, that could actually be real savings to the customer. So that's when that was pointed out, I thought, well, I guess that does kind of make sense. It's similar to the cloud, but certainly not the same.
Right. Yep.
All right, next, top security and compliance improvements. So they talk a little bit here about zero trust environments and LTSR. I think a couple of things that jump out at me are a lot of enhancements around session recording, trusted launch, and secure private access. So let's touch on session recording. This has been around for a while. It was called Virtual Auditor or
Smart
Smart
auditor.
Auditor. Smart Auditor. I knew
That'll
something.
that'll win you a trivia night at a bar right
Yeah,
there.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, for sure. So yeah, Smart Auditor, and that's evolved into session recording. But essentially, this is recording the sessions themselves, and collects metadata that allows you to play them back, kind of like Jeremy, back in the day, I used to say, "Oh, this is kind of like a VCR," and I did that, again, like 3 years later, and people looked at me like, "What? What is that?" So I have to use different
Oh,
terminology
Bill,
now. So I'm showing my
be
age here a little bit. So
be kind,
yeah,
rewind.
I know. Be kind, rewind, exactly. So nevertheless, this is a really good feature for compliance as well as training capabilities.
Yep.
And there's been a lot of enhancement to this regarding recording of non-HDX optimized audio, and the ability to hide apps and other items. Anything you want to double click on here, Jeremy?
With session recording, not so much other than to say, in my new role and having a vantage point with customers again that I haven't had in
Yes.
probably 18
Mhm.
months, when I meet with them, I'm surprised at how many folks have session recording installed and they're
Yeah.
using it. Maybe for a department or just, different areas, but that surprised me a little bit. Why? Shouldn't be surprising, only because it was always something additional to stand up. But,
Mhm.
I think customers are starting to see the value from both a security perspective, from a training perspective. But
Yes.
with so many folks working from home, and I'm not saying this in this context of, they're spying on you, but you've got call centers where this is a big piece of what they do. So I'm starting to see it more and more. It's always been something that has been out there, but man, it continues to improve. We continue to add features, and the fact that there's been updates here with the LTSR, has been pretty impressive.
Yeah. And then the last item here is talks a bit about secure private access. And this capability has historically been a cloud service, and it recently in one of the CRs it was introduced to enable access via on-premises storefront or use a Citrix virtual apps and desktops environment to enable secure private access for your on-prem environments. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy, but I think this is in the new packaging. This is part of the platform license. Is that correct?
Yeah, this entitlement is a part of the platform license,
Right.
but what we've done here is included the bits
Right.
to
Right.
support that right into the latest LTSR. So, again, for the on-prem versions, if you use this in the cloud, it's something that's configured out of Citrix Cloud. There's a
Yes.
workspace service component that's included. There's not much from a NetScaler perspective, given the fact that, a lot of folks are leveraging the gateway service, but
Yeah.
what if you had an SPA use case completely on-prem?
Mhm.
All these bits are built on-prem as well. So it's a combination of both, the DDC, the brokers, if you will. It's a part of storefront. It's a part of the NetScaler gateway. So those pieces in conjunction, um, sort of make up that secure private access solution. And how could I forget? How do you access it with the enterprise browser? So
Enterprise
again, that's
browser.
that's baked into Workspace app. So
Yeah.
there you go.
So this kind of goes back to what we were saying a minute ago, and that is a lot of the feature parity between what's in the cloud and what's on premises, and the bits, to Jeremy's point, the bits for these, even though these were born in the cloud services, but maybe not the enterprise browser itself, but secure private access was certainly originally part of the cloud service, just like the Web Studio was, and Citrix is bringing that to the on-prem world for customers that can't go to the cloud or don't want to go to the cloud. They can still have the ability to access these features without having to do, a new install or have to do a new package. It's essentially built into the bits that you download and have access to as part of the on-premises version.
Yep.
Yep. All right. I think that's pretty much it, Jeremy. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us this afternoon. I'll do the ad for the typical ad for XenTegra. Obviously, we have a lot of customers out there and prospects that are on the older version of the LTSR, and if you need help or assistance or guidance or just want to talk about your upgrade, just reach out to your XenTegra salesperson. You can reach out to me. We certainly would be happy to talk to you and help you if that's what you need. So appreciate you listening. Any final thoughts, Jeremy?
I would be remiss, Bill, if I didn't mention the fact that, we did do a webinar
Yes.
a few weeks back. So that is out
It's on the
It's out on the
XenTegra
website.
YouTube channel.
It's on the XenTegra YouTube channel. Yep. So there's that. There's also a master class that one of our product managers,
Yes.
Alex Rubio, did as well. So one of the things that clearly we could not cover here, and it's an eye chart slide that Bill and I had. So there's a lot of features that have been packed into it. So I highly recommend you bump into it. Some of it'll be very simple, like we've added this TLS version, so we couldn't cover everything. But customers are asking about this latest release because there's a feature. Sometimes it's super small that they're looking for. And so what I would say is check out the webinar, check out the master class. The documentation is in the blog here. So there's a lot of good stuff packed in here. Highly encourage you to check it out.
Yeah. Same here, Jeremy. All right. All right, folks. Thanks for listening. Jeremy, thanks for participating, and we'll see y'all next time.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bill.
Yep.
All right.